Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Johnny Sue, who just had some beautiful braised elk, is on the ones and twos. I'm sorry I had to do that to you. With us today is my good friend, our good friend of the couch, foreign policy junkie, Mark Sleboda is here, ladies and gentlemen. Give it up for Mark Sleboda.
Yay!
Greg, Fiorella, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the conversation couch. And damn you for rubbing that braised elk in my face.
Well, you inspired me, my man, so I'm going to keep going with it. I'm going to keep sending you the pictures to just let you know what you're missing. So you got to come and take a visit, you know what I'm saying? Or maybe I can come to you and we can have some fun cooking.
Yeah, that sounds good. 2 men in the kitchen.
Yeah.
All right, so craziness has broke out in Bolivia.
Yes.
You know why you're here. We're going to keep it to just one subject and one little fun game at the very end. But just give it to us. What the hell is going on in Bolivia, Mark Sleboda?
Okay, so Bolivia, it's not a headline country usually, right? Mm-hmm. It's a Latin American country, landlocked in the middle of South America, high, most of it in mountainous territory, right? It's generally for a long time, it's kind of resource rich, but economically poor, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is due to mismanagement and private ownership for the last 100 years. Evo Morales, it's a country of 11 million people, right? Large indigenous population. Mm-hmm. Evo Morales was a former coca farmer and then labor union activist who led MAS, a movement to socialism. He was elected overwhelmingly in kind of an earthquake shattering politically Bolivia, overwhelming victory 14 years ago. And he has served 3 terms in office in president. Of course, one of the things he did was geopolitically align Bolivia, which was then the emerging pink tide in Latin America with Chavez in Venezuela, Lula in Brazil, Correa in Ecuador, Argentina, and so on. And everything looked like it was going the socialist way. Fast forward 14 years. Morales in Bolivia, in case anyone wants to try to accuse him of mismanagement, as they tried to do with Chavez and Maduro, he reduced the poverty rate in Bolivia by 42%. He reduced the extreme poverty in Bolivia by 60%. The income per person in the country has grown at twice the rate of the Latin American average. Illiteracy under Morales dropped from 13% to 2.4%. Unemployment, 9.2 to 4.1, halved, right? And on top of all this, right, on top of all these socialist benefits and giving things, nationalizing from the rich to the natural resources and using them to raise the poor out of poverty, it's still one of the fastest economically growing countries in the region in terms of GDP. So a complete success story, probably the greatest success story of socialist Latin America in recent times. He's also the first, probably most importantly to the current crisis. He was also the first indigenous president of Bolivia, and one of the only indigenous presidents in Latin America. Of course, there's not so many of those, that you can count on your hands, even historically. So in this, he decided that he wanted to run again for another term, or more. I think probably his party pushed him to do it. And he held a referendum. There was a referendum held, pushed by his party, to allow him to ask the question, should he run for another term? Non-binding, right? And Bolivia doesn't have just two parties. It has two major parties, but there are a number of small parties that do play a role. So the important thing is in electoral terms is plurality, taking that into account, not necessarily a majority. The referendum failed on a razor edge, 51-49. But the Bolivian Supreme Court ruled that this type of term limit was actually unconstitutional, and that Morales could run again. So he did. On October 20th, Bolivians went to the polls to see whether they're going to re-elect Morales for a fourth term or elect his right-wing opponent, Carlos Mesa, a multimillionaire, someone who believed that Latin American countries needed the United States as big brother to guide them. I mean, that we need a big brother. Who of course wanted to reprivatize all of Bolivia's natural resources, which include gas, as yet somewhat undeveloped oil reserves, the largest silver mine in Latin America, and also recently discovered and just starting to exploit, Bolivia has become probably the world's biggest source of lithium.
Yeah.
And you're like, what is lithium? Well, not high on my list either of what I would think of as important things, but it goes in everyone's mobile phones, their smartphones, computer PCs. It goes in everything technology-wise these days, and there's not a whole lot of it. It's an extremely rare, element and resource here. Going forward, technology for the world. And Bolivia just a couple months ago signed a deal with a Chinese company to help them develop it. Can you say they were not happy in the halls of D.C.?
Of course. Of course. Those are two powers.
Yes. So this Carlos Mesa that he was, this right wing that he was running against, before the election even happened, he was saying he would not. He tweeted, right? It's right on Twitter. I will not accept the results if Morales wins. He just, no matter what, he wouldn't accept the results. Because again, there were a few other smaller competing parties in the first round of Bolivian elections. There isn't a second round if one candidate gets more than 50%. Or if he beats his next highest competitor by more than 10%. And that's the key detail here. So the final result, election result, coming out of the October 20th election was 47.1 for Morales and 36.5, i.e. more than 10%. Difference for his right-wing competitor, Carlos Mesa. So no one has any question that Evo Morales won the election, and by American standards anyway, a huge percentage, right? 10%. Now, the opposition, the right-wing opposition, immediately cried foul and said that the election was rigged without any evidence. Marco Rubio, the neocon senator from Florida, immediately jumped on this in Twitter. And with hours, the Organization of American States publicly expressed reservations and that they were investigating. Now, the Organization of American States was founded in 1948 by the United States as an anti-leftist organization of countries in Latin America, specifically to prevent leftist countries from coming to power in Latin America. The U.S. provides 60% of the budget. And just in recent years, the Organization of American States just not only ignored, but reversed the results of an election in Haiti in favor of the U.S. candidate. Right? He lost. and the Organization of American States just declared him the victor. They've whitewashed so many U.S. interferences, invasions and coups in Haiti that it's unbelievable. They also accepted John Guaido, or as Secretary Pompeo calls him, Guido. Forgive me there, Costa. And if Pompeo says that the guy he declares is the president of Venezuela, his name is Guido, then I believe him. Because certainly Pompeo wouldn't mispronounce the name of the guy that he's declaring president of another country. The Organization of American States just accepted the U.S. declared president of Venezuela in that failed coup attempt there. Although I think he's still floating around somewhere, not that anyone pays any attention to him now in Venezuela or elsewhere.
He wants to be president of Bolivia now.
He probably vice president. That's my guess. Because
we saw the meme. We saw it.
An interim president has already been declared.
Right.
So they issued a report with very light on the factual evidence, with a couple of graphs using cherry-picked data to try to claim that the first round, the end of the first round of elections was rigged. Because there are actually two official votes, right, or vote counts in Bolivia. There's a quick count, right, and then there's the real election. And the quick count is basically taking photos of tallies as they're coming in, and it serves as kind of a semi-official exit poll, right? That's what it is. That's a great way to
describe it.
And the this exit poll, this quick count, showed that up to a certain point, up to like 80%, that Carlos Mesa was just within range of the 20%. And then 80% of the vote, the quick count was stopped because the official vote count had begun, which is normal procedure. You don't have two concurrent counts conducted by the government. And this is normal. No quick count has ever actually reached 100% of the vote. When the official vote counting starts, the quick count is stopped. Now, the whole reason there is a quick count is because it's recommended and pushed by the Organization of American States. Yeah. And this was the principal reason, they said, because the vote at the end swung, again, it was only fractionally, but towards Morales, so that Mesa was not within that 10% range that would have declared a second round. Now, here's the thing. There has already this critique by the elections in Bolivia by the Organization of American States has already been thoroughly debunked. There is a think tank, a DC think tank. Let me see if I can get you the name here.
We like to hear think tanks.
Yeah. All right, I'll get it for you by the end. It's the public policy research. Anyway, it's a DC think tank. It's a respectable think tank. They analyzed these results and said, of course, Morales had an uptick at the end because the last votes coming in Bolivia are always the rural areas with the most indigenous and poor people who support him.
Exactly.
And that completely statistically explains why there was a slight uptick at the end of Morales. It had nothing to do with vote stuffing, and there's absolutely no reason to accept these spurious accusations that there was.
It's kind of like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's kind of like like it is here, like progressive votes. They come in late.
They come in late.
It's always the early voting that's kind of more center right, the people who mail away their stuff a long time. And then over here, like, election day. And that's why we're concerned in California, because we have this weird election process. But the progressive votes, the more socialist type of votes, they come in later in the day.
Yeah.
And later in the elections.
It happened with the Pachamama Sawant. It happened with Chesa Boudin. It happened with recent progressives. So makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's a known phenomenon in Bolivia, and in fact, 5 out of 6 of the pre-election polls predicted exactly that, and predicted the margin within the margin of error that Morales would win the first round by. So. That there's absolutely no legitimate reason to believe. This is actually become standard U.S. practice to try to delegitimize elections whenever a leftist that they don't want is winning elections. Not only in Latin America, but they did the same thing in Iran with Ahmadinejad. And the Organization of American States becomes their go-to front in Latin America in order to delegitimize these elections and try to spur exactly what happened. Now, on top of the protests of these right-wing opposition supporters who immediately rejected the results, it seems the it got to at least a number of the generals in police in Bolivia. And they started siding with Mesa, with the right-wing opposition, with the United States, basically. And they have forced Evo Morales to resign. I mean, they literally got on TV and said, in order to stop the violence of the right-wing opposition not accepting the election, you have to step down. And for whatever reason, indigenous people against officials and members of the movement towards socialism in Bolivia, a number of governors' houses were burnt down. Morales' own house was ransacked. We've seen the mayor of Vinto, the horrible video you can see online, Mayor Patricia Arce, A-R-C-E. Anyway, she was dragged through the streets of her own city by this far-right opposition. She was painted from head to toe in red, although she was also beat, so you couldn't really tell what was blood and what was red paint. Her hair was cut off, and she was forced to walk barefoot and sometimes dragged through the streets of the city by these, obviously U.S.-backed pro-democracy protesters, right? I mean, that's the and the official statement from the U.S. on this coup in Bolivia, as these events send a strong signal to the illegitimate regimes in Venezuela and Nicaragua, you're next, that democracy and the will of the people will always prevail. We are now one step closer to a completely U.S.-owned to a completely democratic, prosperous, and free Western Hemisphere. Not suspicious statement at all.
I have a question. Right off the jump, because and this is something I'm noticing, and it just kind of clicked in my mind. Now, I know there are racial divides, class divides. We saw in Venezuela a lot of the protesters, the Juan Guaido protesters, they got about the same color skin as me, where the indigenous people, the Chavistas, seem to be on the other side. It seems in Bolivia, from after actually looking at your Twitter just recently, you had some anti-Morales sing hi kind of people, right, doing like the Hitler thing on your Twitter, I believe. Would you say that the race, here it is right over here, it's Katie Halper, you retweeted it. Yeah. Would you say, I mean, like literally this crap, it seems to me, would you say that the racial divide in Bolivia is even more harsh and more disrespectful to the indigenous people? Because it seems like the opposition here is awful. Like, they seem like Juan Guaido Venezuela-ish on steroids.
Yeah, race is always a big part of this leftist, rightist political divide all across Latin America. You see it in Venezuela, right, with Chavez and Maduro, as well as in Bolivia. But in Bolivia, it seems to be extremely strong, and those who have more of the white European colonizer blood feel that they are racially superior, i.e. should be the economic elite and political class of their countries. And this is seen outright with these events and this far-right opposition in Bolivia. There's an excellent article on the Gray Zone by Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton. Bolivia coup led by Christian fascist paramilitary leader and millionaire with foreign support. And I strongly encourage you. It's a slog. It's a long read. A lot of information they dug up there. And the while Mesa, Carlos Mesa, is the millionaire, the U.S. backed millionaire who ran against Morales. The big leader who has emerged, he's been referred to at least by Western media as the big opposition leader on the streets, right, is this Luis Fernando Camacho. And this guy is a Christian fundamentalist fascist.
Similar to Bolsonaro.
He is straight out of the Franco from Spain playbook. And go online, watch the videos. He's got a paramilitary, a fascist paramilitary organization, the Santa Cruz Youth Union. That's the one. Union Juvenil Cruzanista. Although if you take a look, that it's not like they're kids or anything. This is a brown shirt paramilitary, and trust the United States to find fascists even in Bolivia to support to overthrow a government.
Yeah, find fascists in a country that's...
You would say fascists in Bolivia? What? No, the U.S. found them.
3%
and that's a big part of the movement.
Yeah, there's only... Bolivia's majorly indigenous, so they found that like the 1 to 3% of white people that exist there and turned to them, just like the United States to do. And and by the way, this guy Camacho is very similar to Bolsonaro. He's described, and he also has ties to the Panama Papers as well.
Oh yeah, he's as corrupt. Him and Mesa are both there. I got a quote from Camacho here in the last couple days. Pachamama will never return to the palace. Wow. Bolivia belongs to Christ. Now, Pachamama is the Andean Mother Earth spirit, a principle of the new, if you want to call it the neo-pagan religion in Bolivia that is quite common among the indigenous peoples. And there you see quite clearly, this religious, racist, these indigenous barbarians are pagans. They're never allowed to return to the palace. And that's exactly the nature of this guy. Now, there's all kinds of violence going on right now in Bolivia because with at least the large portions of the police and military supporting this coup against Morales. And it has to be said that the general who made this public statement forcing, saying that Morales had to resign, his name is General Kalaman. He just got finished a couple years ago serving as military attaché to the U.S. He was stationed in D.C., all right, where obviously he was recruited by the CIA. And also the police commander, Calderon Mariscal, who is the head of the police pushing this. He also served recently in D.C. on a organization of Alpalpa, which is a inter-Latin American organization that's supposed to fight organized crime in Latin America, it's based out of Washington, D.C. And so with these two military and police leaders who are pushing and facilitating this coup on the ground, both directly linked to the United States. Mesa himself came back just during the election campaign with a $10 million war chest announced right after his visit to the United States. That, of course, was announced right when he came back from the U.S. There's so many U.S. ties here between Mesa and this Christian fundamentalist Camacho and these two police leaders. The U.S. hand behind this is pretty evident. Now, just in the last few hours, in the whole John Guaido vein, a woman who belongs to the opposition right-wing party called the Democrat Union Party. She was a senator in the Bolivian parliament, and she's just declared herself president of Bolivia, interim president, of course. Never mind that she wasn't even running for election. And she's got no constitutional authority to do so. Her name is Janine Anna. And you can find her online. 6 days ago on Twitter, she posted a picture of a few indigenous supporters of Morales who were holding a rally. And in Spanish, she said, indigenous, ? And she basically said, I don't think so. And on the picture, she circled their feet, put a big green circle around their feet with an arrow. And what she is obviously implying from this is that they're wearing shoes. And these indigenous barbarians don't wear shoes. So quite obviously, they weren't real indigenous people as far as she's concerned, because they were wearing shoes. And this is the woman who just declared herself president of Bolivia. Now, she's got absolutely no grounds to do so because Morales has fled the country with a police warrant out for his arrest already, chased by the military. He's been given political asylum by the leftist president of Mexico, Obrador, in Mexico. Also, the vice president and the heads of both houses of the Bolivian legislature are also gone. Right? They've either fled or been captured at this point. And they've declared several sessions of the Brazilian parliament already, although they can't get anywhere near a quorum constitutionally necessary to hold proceedings, because all of Morales's movement to socialism elected officials are either fled or they're literally being hunted down and either lynched on the streets or taken into custody by the military and police supporting this coup attempt. I've seen videos of them literally smoking out Morales supporters. That is, throwing smoke bombs into their houses, right, to drive them out. It's a real going on. So they couldn't get a quorum to hold proceedings constitutionally. So this woman, Janine Anna, is a senator. First, she declared herself head of the Senate, president of the Senate. Why? Because she's one of the few ones that are actually in the room. And now she's declared herself president, completely unconstitutionally. But hey, that's what the U.S. defines as democracy, because they did the same thing with John Guaido, right? Mm-hmm. That's the situation right now on the streets. It's pretty bad. The indigenous supporters of Morales have already started marching, demanding their president back, and demanding an end to the coup. But things probably don't look good for them. Whatever numbers they can muster, they're facing an armed police and military that seems largely aligned with the opposition. And one of the big issues here is that Morales made the Wahapo flag, the flag of the indigenous people of Bolivia, the kind of the second official flag of Bolivia, recognizing the large numbers of indigenous people. And the police and military actually had it on their uniforms underneath the official Bolivian flag. And they've been burning this flag in the streets. And I've seen police and military cutting this flag off of their uniforms. Again, clearly the anti-indigenous racist element here. And the fact that this attitude is still so prevalent in the police and the military after 13 years of Morales being president says that he did a really bad job as a leftist. Knowing that police and military are used, in these juntas and coup attempts by the U.S. to overthrow leftist leaders, he should have really instituted reform of both the police and the military, to prevent this type of quislings from having institutions of power in this country. That was done in Venezuela by Chavez, and it's why Maduro is still president, because the police and the military, despite the U.S. threatening them openly on Twitter, you'll support our declared president of Venezuela if you care for your families and children. This is the same type of pressure that I'm sure the U.S. put the police and military in Bolivia under, although it seems they still had a number of people that were all too willing to turn against the indigenous that they see shouldn't be running their country. So there's a lot of violence on the streets. I expect the violence to grow. Morales has said he's not giving up, that he intends resistance, the pushback, but coming from Mexico with the police and military supported by the U.S. and by all the other right-wing Latin American states now, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, etc. It's really hard to see how this ends in anything but, the killing of a lot of indigenous protesters on the streets in Bolivia, unfortunately. And I expect to see a neoliberal regime which privatizes all of the resources of Bolivia, gas, oil, lithium, silver, you name it. And American companies are going to be lining up to take control of those Bolivian natural resources in the coming months.
So as far as the United States, we haven't yet found the money ties, but there have been audio files released in Spanish, and I've been listening to them. And they clearly name Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and the Menendez from New Jersey. Knowing that, and knowing the obvious involvement of our government in that, two things: how do we hold them accountable, and then how do we help, in a way, stand against this regime change that has already happened, but. I mean, as an American, I think we need a war movement, because this keeps happening, and I just feel like not enough is being done on the ground by us, because not many people are informed about it.
Yeah, you can't do anything. I mean, you can do individual action as personal catharsis, but let's be honest that years of the Democrats through the Clintons and the Obama governments in the U.S. Perpetuating the same wars, the forever wars of hegemony, across the Middle East, and interference in countries, right? Obama, and Clinton were responsible for supporting the right-wing coup in Honduras during his administration. There is no anti-war movement. You know that very well. There isn't. It doesn't exist, right? Code Pink, sure. That's a few thousand people across the country total who go on the streets. And you saw, the brave Code Pink and other people who tried to hold the Venezuelan embassy the U.S. for a couple of weeks against this Guaido, backed by the U.S., who were trying to take it over. Eventually, they did, and they barely made the headlines in the U.S. press because the press is completely aligned with the hegemonic regime of the U.S. Foreign policy blob and deep state, whatever party holds office. And years of Democrats with Clinton and Obama supporting this agenda have completely neutered an anti-war movement, right? When Trump bombed Syria on the pretext of chemical weapons use against al-Qaeda, the Democrats were supporting even louder than the Republicans were.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they were.
The Democrats have become the other party of war, a party that thinks that the CIA tells the truth and that they're something that they're patriots, and never mind Iraqi weapons of mass destruction or accusations of genocide in Libya or any of these other things. The Democrats have bought in at this point perhaps even more.
Yeah.
In some instances than the Republican base, if only because of Trump has kind of confused them a bit from their usual routine. So I fully support protests. I'm sure Code Pink will be out there. Get out there with them. Anything. Make posts online. Write to your senators, congressmen. Sure, all these things. Sign petitions. But at the end of the day, don't have any illusions that it's actually going to do anything any more than it did in Venezuela or Yemen or Syria or Libya or anywhere else. If you do it out of a sense of personal catharsis because it's the right thing to do, not because you have any illusions that it's actually going to change anything in the United States.
I think there's always a chance. I think the coup in Venezuela failed. You know what I'm saying? Maduro is still in power. And, I often
look, it had nothing to do with Americans protesting.
Well, yeah, that was because they were prepared for it. As you said, Morales should have had, like you said before, a successor or had it groomed somebody to come after him, and he didn't. And I think that's a naivety. It's a lack of, he seems like a really wonderful, nice person. Bernie Sanders and him have been to several events together. He just seems like such a nice guy. I just feel like he didn't do what he should have done as a leader, and because a leader creates other leaders that are gonna stand there. And when you have the military and the police entirely against you, it is going to be next to impossible. I'm wondering what China is going to do about it. Because China, of course, went to Bolivia for the lithium, as you said, and we didn't like that. So we're seeing China, who we see as our biggest competitor, go after such a powerful resource. So what do you think China is going to do with what's happened now?
Unfortunately, I don't think China actually has the ability to do anything. They don't have that big of geopolitical pool yet, particularly with Bolivia, which is a landlocked country, in the Western Hemisphere. And certainly we know they've got their own problems now between, the U.S.-backed protests or riots, I should say, in Hong Kong, and the trade war that's being waged against them. I'm sure they don't like to see this happen, but they don't have the footprint on the ground. No one does. China doesn't. Russia doesn't. No one has the footprint on the ground in Bolivia to be able to do anything other than, make statements condemning this from afar, which Russia at least already has. I haven't heard that China has, but I wouldn't be surprised. However, China's statements are always somewhat more muted and, shall we say, diplomatic in their Chinese vagueness than the more forthright Russians are in calling out the United States on its hegemonic BS when it gets up to it around the world. So unfortunately, I don't expect China to really do anything.
What about Ecuador? We talk about Ecuador, and they have a lot of big indigenous population. Now, they didn't necessarily beat back or overthrow the government, but they were able to put them in check. Bolivia has a big, population of indigenous people. Is there a possibility we can see a movement get together, more organized, to take back their country, kind of do what Ecuador did, and maybe we one day see Evo Morales return?
It's not impossible, right? I mean, they did come to power off the backs of a grassroots indigenous people 14 years ago. But at least right now, this coup seems to be, fully supported by the police and military in the country. They seem more prepared, much more than prepared than the slapstick operation that happened in Venezuela. And I don't think they have any compunctions about killing indigenous protesters. And because of the lack of centrality of Bolivia to events in the world and its relatively isolated location, you can't expect to see too many journalists on the ground calling attention to any type of repression or atrocities that take place. And I'm afraid that a lot of it will happen, and much of it we may not even know about. At least the general public won't know about unless they're paying a lot of specific attention. Because if you take a look on the headlines of all the major Western mainstream media publications, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox News, CNN, try to look for the word coup about what's happening in Bolivia. They literally say that because Morales resigned, that it's not a coup. Like he wasn't forced to by general, military aligned with the opposition telling him he had to resign. And, he actually said, all right, you don't believe this election results, we'll hold another election.
Exactly.
Everyone ignored him, including the Organization of American States and the United States and everyone else. They have no interest in this, of course, because none of their accusations are actually true in the first place. And any elections that will proceed into the future in Bolivia will basically happen under the same auspices of, quote, democratic elections happened after the 2014 U.S.-backed putsch in Ukraine, i.e. the leftist parties will be banned, right, as they were in Ukraine. Leftist parties were banned from elections. You'll hear a lot about free and fair elections there. Sure, after the leftist parties bans and all the parties, that are in opposition to the new government, including Movement Social, they'll be lustrated. Anyone who ever served in those governments forbidden from holding office again. And their politicians and their organizers around the country will be facing a pogrom, very, very real pogrom. And this is exactly what happened in Ukraine. You completely level the opposition. And then after a few years of complete rule by the new regime, you start to open things up a little bit after they've been neutered and knocked completely to the ground politically for a few years. The right wing, the coup plotters have already announced they intend to completely revisit the Constitution as well. They're going to rewrite the Constitution without any kind of legislative or legitimate democratic ability to do so, because it's far too leftist for their tastes. And they will rewrite the Constitution to guarantee as much as they can that they hold power in Bolivia long into the future.
Mark, can you try to refresh your screen real quick? You're stuck. You're frozen.
So are you.
We're both frozen. Should we try to hang up and call real quick? Back again? We're going to call you back real quick. We're going to hang up. Everybody we have a super chat contribution. When we come back, Mark, we want you to answer the question. So is there definite proof of the U.S. being involved? Maybe you can talk about some of the money lines. Okay, he's off. Bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for staying here. Santa Cruz group. Thank you, everybody, for joining us right now. Let's see who's on. sorry. Jai Gabbard is here.
Hi, Jai.
RFO. Yeah, guys, David Crow, Uncle Crow, we're all here.
Uncle Crow.
Where's Mark Sleboda? Do we have a Mark Sleboda? Okay.
Yay.
So, Mark, here's the question.
Oh, did it again.
You there?
Yeah, he's
Perfect.
there.
It says,
I'm here.
we have a Super Chat contribution on the MCSC network. Thank you very much from Marcus Will. So, is there definitive proof the U.S. is involved? And I'd like you to explain that with the financial ties.
Right.
You said something about a war chest of $10 million coming back, and I believe it was the Santa Cruz group from Camacho. Give us a little bit more information about that.
Yeah. Okay. So, are there definitive ties from the U.S.? I mean, other than the fact that the U.S. is full-throatedly support what has happened there, the personal ties of both Camacho and Mesa, frequently flying to the U.S. And associating there with them and saying that the U.S. should play a big brother role in their country. This $10 million political war chest to run that Mesa acquired sometime during his trip to the United States. I mean, to be fair, there are a number of wealthy Bolivians who have essentially made themselves self-exiles, but I doubt that they coughed up quite that much for Mesa's political effort. But we also know Mesa previously served as vice president and briefly as president of Bolivia right before Morales was elected back in the early 2000s. And since he's been out of office, we know from WikiLeaks' release of diplomatic cables that Mesa was in regular conversation with figures in the U.S., reporting on them of what he considered unacceptable behavior by the new government, and the State Department basically reassuring him, that he had their support, and that basically to be patient, and we'll see what we can do to support your party in the country. And then that's right in WikiLeaks. Constant conversation between Mesa and the U.S. State Department when he's out of office, obviously happening, not at the level of official communication. These police and generals having served as attachés and envoys, in very recent years in Washington, D.C. That's what we've got so far. To type of definitively tie the U.S. into this. It's a good question.
All right, so I think it's time. Do you have any more questions before we go to the politicians, the way they responded?
Yeah.
Bernie's tweet. Yeah. All right, so Bernie has a tweet about the situation. We ran into Tulsi yesterday, and I think you mentioned Marco Rubio's Twitter. Those are the three areas I want to talk about. Here's Bernie's tweet. Take a look. You have it, or? I can't see it, though. You have to put it up for me. Let me get the tweet up for you, Mark. The twiddle. So Bernie says, I am very concerned about what appears to be a coup in Bolivia where the military, after weeks of political unrest, intervened to remove President Evo Morales. The U.S. must call for an end to the violence and support Bolivia's democratic institutions. First thoughts? I mean, I think he nailed this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of on Bernie Sanders with foreign policy, but at least he has spoken out. Of course, it's always interpretational what you consider to be the democratic institutions in Bolivia at this moment, because that's already been ripped up pretty much. And there aren't really any democratic institutions left at this point already in the country. But give Bernie credit. He's one of the only U.S. politicians who have spoken out about this. Ilhan Omar has as well, I believe. And out of the UK, the shadow prime minister, Jeremy Corbyn, probably with the strongest statement that I've seen talking about how shocked he is and how absolutely unacceptable this is to see a leftist government, so obviously and illegally overthrown with the U.S. backing in this way.
Yeah.
So I think we know a lot today, what we didn't know yesterday. Take a look at Tulsi's answer. We caught up with her at town hall, and you tell me if this is okay or acceptable. Or what do you think?
What is your opinion on what is going on in Bolivia with Evo Morales, who was just ousted in what appears to be a U.S.-backed coup?
I'm really gathering the facts and the information around this. I don't have the full picture, the full story. There are a lot of different narratives being brought forward on what has led to his announced resignation, and so I need to get the facts first.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you think that's acceptable for the regime change candidate to wait for a little bit more information? This was yesterday, I take it. Your personal opinion?
No. This is absolutely not acceptable. I mean, this is, such egregious U.S. Involvement here. It doesn't seem that Marco Rubio, or the others who aren't, haven't been made aware of the facts or at least the narratives that they believe in, and they've been really active on this. Tulsi, one of Tulsi's big credit, is that as her military experience and her foreign policy experience in the House, sitting on so many important foreign policy and military committees, is that she's ready to be president on day one. Well, if she doesn't know what her own government is so obviously getting up to in Bolivia, she can't bother to read the headlines. Well, then I have to say it doesn't seem that she's ready to be the president, the foreign policy president that I want her to be on day one with that kind of response. Get with it, Tulsi.
Yeah.
If Bernie can even make a statement on this, then wow, I'm kind of shocked that she hasn't actually.
So when I asked her that question, I was thoroughly disappointed. However, I know that she was really busy. She was she had a full schedule. I was covering several of her events, and so was Pasta. I can attest she has a small team of people. She doesn't have a social media team that Bernie does. She doesn't have all those people working for her, and that's like the only reason. But I definitely was like, okay, if you're the regime change candidate, you are at a higher level. I expect more of you than of Bernie Sanders. I honestly liked Bernie's answer, but I also felt like it was superficial. I felt like it didn't go deep enough into the regime change.
Sure.
It didn't really full on call out the CIA or any of the big major players. And it didn't say that the U.S. was directly involved. And so I wanted Tulsi to kind of be the one to kind of say that. And when she didn't, I was like, I mean, it's better than her giving the wrong answer. But I mean, I 100% agree with you. I feel like this is her wheelhouse. This is where she should shine, and she should know. She should know. It's everywhere. It's literally everywhere.
I
think I don't believe that she doesn't know. I will say that right out. I think that her statement is a complete dodge, and I have to wonder why she feels that she has to dodge taking a position on Bolivia.
What do you think, Boss?
Well, I guess I'm standing alone on this one. I mean, no, listen, I wasn't as upset as I was when I asked her about Hong Kong. I saw the direct money lines to Jimmy Lai. We saw the NED, the NGOs. We really didn't see a lot of the money lines, and we're just learning about them today. I mean, when you talked about the war chest, that's the first I heard of it. And, the Gray Zone themselves, they normally do videos. They did a long 2-hour live stream today kind of explaining this and rolling this out. So I didn't see anything wrong with it, the fact that she wanted to take some time to know everything about the situation because, like I said, we know a lot more today than we do yesterday. However, I would have liked to seen a little bit more of, something. And especially she knows we're coming because every time the Convo Couch sees her, it's what's going on in foreign policy that day. In fact, Fiorella was interviewing her and asked her a question, said, do you know, and it was just breaking news, that the police were breaking in to the Venezuelan embassy in D.C., and Fiorella was informing her of that as it was happening. So, I did expect a little bit more, but like I told Fiorella and like we spoke about it today, I am not as upset as I was when she answered us on Hong Kong. And here's the thing. She progressed, and 2 weeks later in a town hall, she gave the answer that I wanted to hear. She understood what was going on. She saw the NED pumping money in there. So I guess since we didn't see the direct money lines right away, I thought maybe we should wait and see a little bit. But I don't know. I can't argue with you guys on this one. You know, as much as I like Tulsi, I can't argue.
And I have to say, Mark, I don't know if you agree with me, but I feel like I've seen a tendency of the one weakness Tulsi has foreign policy-wise is Latin America. She doesn't seem to be as either well-versed or as, like, adamant about it as she is with the Middle East and then Syria and the Wahhabism there. She seems a little bit more unaware. Even during a debate where she had the chance to tie the regime change with the coup in Honduras in 2009, she wasn't able to tie that to immigration and just things like that I'm seeing that is her weak point, and I feel like she does need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. Obviously Tulsi has experience on the ground in the Middle East, having been a combat vet of Iraq and everything, and she's perhaps understandably more connected and concerned there because of the U.S. military involvement on the ground. Whereas everything that the U.S. gets up to in Latin America, at least for the last few decades, has, with the exception of Haiti, maybe, has been more done by the CIA and behind closed doors with handshakes with right-wing opposition and so on. Even absent a direct money line case, though, she could still condemn the events that have happened there.
Yeah.
It is actually illegal under U.S. law to support a coup.
Right.
And to provide financial support and relations with a country that has had. That's a technicality of U.S. law that, of course, that is completely ignored. It's still it's still,
like I said, I wasn't as upset. Like with Hong Kong, I was like, and I asked her, I followed up and said, well, what about the NED? And she's like, well, I don't know about those nefarious acts just yet. You know what I'm saying? And I was just like, oh.
And he was heartbroken.
I was like,
this time it was me. I was like,
because I wanted to be so good on this stuff. And it was kind of funny because we were going around talking to the crowd yesterday. We talked to a young Bernie supporter. Fiorella actually worked out on the beach with the veterans in Tulsi. This young lady, it's Gloria, right? Or Glory?
I think it's Glory.
And she even said, I said, what's an area of concern with yours when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard? She goes, I want her to get better on foreign policy in South and Central and Latin America. She's not as good and solid as she is when it comes to Syria, the Middle East, whatnot. And you know what? It's not the first time I heard that argument.
Yeah, and it can only help her to. Yeah, it can only help her. It's constructive. I'm not. I think she's still by far like the best on foreign policy.
By far.
I also think because of the leftist versus right nature of so much of what happens in Latin America, that the U.S. is acting opposition to leftist governments there. I think as a progressive Democrat, she's probably she's already been painted as a Russia apologist, as a Assad apologist. She's probably real hesitant of being linked to, shall we say, the far left, despite, being considered a progressive. The whole history there, although, now that seems now the Democrats are the party of the neo-McCarthyites, not the party of the leftists. But that's probably a concern in her making. And again, it's not a lack of information; it's a dodge. It's a dodge at this point.
That's a good
by the way, I have the name of that think tank for you real quick: the Center for Economic and Policy Research, out of D.C. Mark Weisbro, Dan Cashman. You can follow them both on social media as well. They're also in the media. Weisbro had a good piece on The Nation just in the last few days. And he also, for once, was allowed to speak on Democracy Now! And has an important interview with Amy Goodman on there as well. It must be a blue moon. The paper His headline for The Nation, the article in The Nation is, "The Trump administration is undercutting democracy in Bolivia. This is a military coup. There's no doubt about it now." All right.
Yeah.
So it's check Wisebro and the Center for Economic and Policy Research out on The Nation, on Democracy Now, and elsewhere to read for yourself their assessment of this election in Bolivia and what has happened since, and make up your own mind. You don't have to believe me sitting in Moscow.
Yeah.
Mark, you got 5 things for us, or what? We're gonna play this game there. Did you do this one, or are we?
Yeah. I don't know if I can
probably
limit it
came
to
up with some
5,
good
but,
stuff,
but
right?
go ahead. Let's play.
All right, let me explain to the audience what's going on. Okay, we said Mark is going to be president, and he's going to give us what he's going to do in his first 5 days of his presidency.
Which country? Which country?
The United States of America, sir.
Oh, yeah, that one. Okay.
I was
born
the one
there.
you served in the
I
United
served in
States
the military
Navy
there.
for.
Let's go with that. Okay.
Yeah. And the reason why this came about is because we had talked and we've asked you before. You're like, forget all that domestic policy stuff. When it comes to the Constitution, you got to go with the powers they may be. You can direct the CIA, the FBI. You can do this. Bada bing, bada boom. So what does Mark Sleboda do on his first day as president?
Okay, so let's make the caveats here that I don't participate in American politics anymore. I used to. I served in the military. I organized for the Democratic Party in the military. One of my collateral duties was even election assistance officer. I helped register people to vote in the military, just as a volunteer duty on top of all the operating a nuclear reactor I was doing. And when I got out, I was organizing for the Democratic Party as the head of Democrats Abroad Russia here. I helped register hundreds of people to vote for Kerry, believe it or not, for Obama. And I don't feel it's my place to be part of American politics anymore. I don't even want to. So I don't vote in the U.S. anymore, and I try to be somewhat muted of when actual elections are happening, because I don't want to be accused of meddling in the U.S. election by having an opinion on it, or living in Russia or anything like that. But if I did suddenly become president of the United States, all right. So first of all, I would cut the Pentagon budget from roughly $1 trillion to around $250 million. It would still make U.S. military spending the largest military spending in the world, but it would be something that might limit the U.S. Ability to play global military hegemon. Included in that, there's some 1,000 foreign U.S. military bases. Let's reduce that to 10. Make your cut. U.S. doesn't need more than 10 foreign military bases. No, China has one. Russia has a handful, and most of them, other than the recent ones in Syria, are in the former Soviet Union. Let's cut that down to 10.
Are you still there with us? You freeze again.
For U.S. president to project military power around the world.
Are you there, Mark?
Can you hear me?
Well, I think we're getting zapped over here because you're giving people too many good ideas right off the bat. Because are you there? My question was wait, you don't have to go to Congress to cut the Pentagon? Don't you have to go sit down and get in the committees and bring a bill to the floor, or you can cut all the bases down to 10 and go from 1 trillion to 250 million. You could cut the budget of the Pentagon 75%. You don't have to go to Congress?
Obviously, that is aspirational. That would be the proposal I would put to Congress, which certainly wouldn't be allowed. But since we're playing theoretical, and I'm the U.S. president anyway, I thought we'd go there. I would push for the U.S. to be taken out of NATO. I'd push to dismantle NATO as a Cold War relic, that is only increasing tensions through the world, and call for a new security architecture, a global security architecture to encompass Europe, to include Russia, and possibly even China as well as one of the other permanent members of the Security Council. If we want to play real global ending geopolitical struggles. There's hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops abroad, in and elsewhere. U.S. nuclear, European countries, and Turkey, they need to be brought home. U.S. missile defense in Europe, South Korea, and Japan. No, that is trying to destroy the logic of mutually assured destruction. I would seek to reinstitute the anti-ballistic missile defense treaty that George W. Bush pulled out of, or work on a joint global missile defense to prevent the launch of nuclear weapons by any country with Russia and China. Missile defense is destabilizing and makes the American people less safe and more likely a situation of nuclear conflict by restarting an arms race. And support for Israel, that's got to go.
Yay! It's my favorite.
Seriously, that's got to be ended.
Well,
financial support, military support, U.S. taxpayers fund apartheid and ethnic cleansing in Israel to a tune of tens of millions of dollars in military and financial aid every year. That's an atrocity. That's an atrocity.
Yeah.
So that's 4. You got one more?
And democracy promotion. That is certainly within the purview of the president, although Congress might try to limit this euphemism of democracy promotion for U.S. meddling in countries around the world. That's got to end completely. National Endowment for Democracy, i.e., the ones who used to do, who now do openly what the CIA used to do, as their first director said. Yeah, we get rid of that. We stopped funding gongos like the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute. They're gone. We don't meddle in other countries anymore. We operate under the principle of U.S. President John Quincy Adams in his famous Monsters to Destroy speech, where he said we should, if we really want to be the democratic leaders of the world, we should lead by example. And we should not meddle or participate in foreign countries' politics or wars, because if we did, we would become the dictatress of the world. And that's where we are. And that's what I would see to end. However strongly I could push all of that, the U.S. pursuit of global military hegemony, if I was the U.S. president.
Is there anything you can do there without the consent of Congress? Anything on that list that you can say, hey, I don't need your permission. I'm just going to stop. I'm not giving money to Israel. I'm getting rid of the NED. I'm not getting involved in other countries. I'm going to direct the CIA, which Kennedy did too, to no longer stay in those other countries.
Well, ostensibly the president does control the institutions of the bureaucratic federal government, meaning the CIA, the NSA, and so on. So theoretically, I should have the U.S. president has direct control there, but we saw quite clearly that Trump doesn't have control of those institutions, and he's the president. The one thing that the U.S. president seems to be able to do without Congress approving is declare new wars, invade other countries. Congress has obviously abdicated the authority of the War Powers Resolution to declare wars to the executive office, even with Trump in, supposedly a Putin puppet, according to some. They don't want to take that power away from him. So perhaps if I invaded Israel and attempted to restore territory to Palestine, maybe I could get away with doing that. Exactly. Yeah, of course, no, that wouldn't work either.
I mean, that would be better than nothing, I think, at this point.
You got to just start invading every single country we're aligned with. Like, go into Colombia, go
Saudi
into
Arabia.
Brazil, go into Saudi Arabia, go into Qatar, go into Bahrain. You know what I'm saying? Just invade these countries. That's great.
If there is one thing that the Trump presidency has taught us is, and Trump does have a realist gut instinct, right? That the U.S. is imperialistly overstretched, although it's for the wrong reasons. He's more concerned about cost-benefit analysis than he is the rightness or wrongness of it. But if there's one thing that it's taught us is that the president does not have the power to change U.S. foreign and military policy. And that both parties will act to restrict him, both in Congress and within, the federal government, the deep state, the blob. Everything will resist that. And let's not forget that both George W. Bush and Obama both came to office promising to concentrate more on domestic matters and leave off the, at least so heavy on the foreign interventions and so on. Both George W. Bush and Obama campaigned on that. And we saw what happened when they took office, much less Trump actually promising to end the policy of regime change, which he just so obviously played a part in Bolivia. The U.S. president does not have that power. Let's be realistic.
Yeah, we're going to recap the 5-1 real quick because you got cut out the whole time. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you have a list there you can read? I wrote some stuff down, but if you got it written down, you can go do it real quick.
Yeah, and NATO, and start a new global, at least transatlantic and possibly global security architecture. Stop democracy promotion. Stop meddling, the CIA meddling in foreign countries. Reduce the Pentagon budget to 20% of what it is now. Stop foreign military aid to Israel and other countries. Withdraw U.S. troops, bases, and nuclear weapons from around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can the president just say, I'm not giving money to Saudi Arabia? Like we always see new presidents going, can the next president go, I ain't giving money to Saudi Arabia. I ain't got to deal with it. They ain't getting it. And it just veto any type of legislation that comes there.
Yes, he could veto it. I mean, he would face. We've seen during the Trump years, Congress attempt to legislate foreign policy over Trump's head, something that should be within the purview of the president. But for instance, they've passed laws forbidding the president from stopping sanctions on other countries, including Russia. So what should have been the purview of the president has now been stepped into Congress when the president tried to substantially change U.S. foreign policy away from the status quo pursuit of hegemony. So everything would be challenged by Congress. Everything. Assuming I didn't come to power with a majority in both of those houses.
Right.
Well. There's no way to Teddy Roosevelt the son of a bitch and just avoid the just go over the Congress, say I'm going to go work without the Congress. I'm going to abandon the Congress.
Yeah, but they're going to do something.
Let's be honest, particularly when it comes to foreign and military policy, the U.S. is only a partial democracy. The acceptable range of political opinion is restricted and narrowed, and presidents presidential candidates like Tulsi Gabbard, you see the whole range of other politicians and everything, the media out to derail her, even despite her low rating in the polls. And that is the impasse. That is how democracy is filtered in the U.S. through the prisms of campaign finance, support by corporations, the media, and so on. And Donald Trump slipped through all of that and still found himself hobbled by the deep state, and by officials out of the ranks of the Republican Party that he appointed, like John Bolton, like Pompeo, like others, that then just stopped carrying out his orders and started conducting their own foreign policy. That's not a real democracy, of course. It's not a completely undemocratic, but it's got a restricted range of democracy, like actually many countries do around the world.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's it. We got anything else and stuff?
No,
hey, Mark,
great.
it was a great show. It was a long show, but we've been
always.
putting up your Twitter handle too as well. You can go to Mark Sleboda's Twitter and check it out. And the one thing I have to say about this whole situation is hashtag Epstein did not hang himself. Did not kill himself. I even screwed it up. So it's Johnny.
The one thing all Americans can agree on.
Yes,
Bolivia.
hashtag.
Read the Gray Zone Project. Read Mint Press News. Read Anya Parampil, Max Blumenthal, Mark Weisbro. Those are the ones you want to follow to keep current with what's really happening in Bolivia.
Yep, absolutely.
I think that Tulsi should hire Dan Cohen to be her foreign policy advisor. She can't afford a lot of people. Get one guy from the Gray Zone to plug in and get you all the information you need.
Yep. All right, Mark. Thank you so much.
For Pasta Jardula.
Fiorella, Greg, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark Sleboda. Johnny Sue.
Convo out.